Right, team, we're now online. Hi, welcome to this meeting of the Regulatory Committee. And before we do anything, I'll ask for any apologies, and I've been notified by Councillor Evans that he is unable to come today. Councillor McDonald is zooming in. Apart from that, I think everybody's here. So could I have a motion that we accept the apologies from Councillor Evans, please? Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Seconded by Councillor Rodway. All in favour? Thank you.
Actually on the committee.
Sorry?
I don't know that he's actually on the committee anyway, so.
Who's that?
Paul.
No, well, he did actually apologise that he was going to intended to be here. Now we have some visitors today up at the back of the room. Were they to be introduced to us?
Hello, my name's Angela Willis. I'm the team leader at Consent and Compliance Easement, and we have two new ladies started. We've got Chris Ryan. This is for us. And Dawn Anderson, this is for second week.
Well, welcome. I hope you enjoy your time with us.
I think you'll know I'm Tanya, I'm team leader at Monitoring Enforcement, and we have the monitoring officer who is on day 4, so I don't scare him away yet. So yeah, he's taken over from Emmanuel, who moved down to the Independent Environmental Technical Officer. So we can focus on hearing and do a lot of things. But quite hard his background and his, I guess, outline the self and pedigree from a number of staff around the organisation to make sure that you know who the real self one does.
Good. So welcome. Are there any declarations of interest?
Well, I do have consent to go to the dairy farm and obviously more inspections and things, so that will hear that.
All right, have you declared those before? Or is
I
it?
have done this, I just do I need to keep on declaring?
No. Once you've done it once, it should be part of the record.
Specific things here that obviously I have advice maybe.
I think you it depends on the content of the reports.
Yes.
You know,
It's a company specific to the business of the meeting. But there is a form which everybody can fill out. List those stuff. Thank you, though.
And me, so I'm one of the hearing commissioners and one of the persons consents.
Okay, thank you for that.
So I'll step out if there's any discussion about that today.
All right. The next item is the public forum petitions and deputations. None of those today. The confirmation of the minutes from our last meeting. That's from the 11th of May, moved by Chairman Horrell. That's is it correct record? Really that it is correct record?
Yes.
Seconded. Councillor Gibson.
Chairman, I wasn't at that meeting, but I was interested in the item about commissioners, and there is a report there, but it's not very detailed about what actions can we take or encourage South people, particularly anyway, to become commissioners. Is that something that's expanded on a bit here, or can I find out more about that?
I can answer some of that. Mr. Holes will probably be more detailed answer. I raised that one because I felt that we were searching for commissioners for hearings. I've spoken to some local iwi who assure me that they have quite a number of people who are qualified, making good decisions who could be used. However, they almost inevitably have conflicts in terms of the subject of the hearings. So we end up bringing people in to deal with that. So they assure me that they have a number of their staff who've gone through the training program. So it was just an impression I had that we didn't have anybody. In fact, we do.
All right, thank you.
Chairman Cook, I wasn't at that meeting, so can I second the minutes?
Second it for the purpose of discussion.
That's right.
local chairman was there, so he could move it. Yep. I think that's the rules. And you'll tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think normally you to move, you have to have been at the meeting.
That's right.
I think you can second without being it.
I think, Chairman, I think you've largely covered it, but we, as a follow-up to that discussion that Councillor Rodway's queried, I spoke to Mike Trentak, our fire manager here, about that particular issue and desire to facilitate team involvement in decision-making processes, and there was a course run which he attended and several others have attended towards the end of 2022. So certainly a willingness from the local representatives to be involved. There is that issue that the chairman's raised about quite often my partner are submitting an application, and it's challenging to have a submitter and then have a Ngāi representative as part of the panel. So at times we've had to use commissioners who specialise in Māori perspectives from outside of Southland, such as Reg Profit, for instance, who have used quite a bit locally to bring that perspective into the decision making. But there are opportunities potentially for Murihiku representatives to participate in processes further up north where they have a similar scenario.
Oh,
Mr. Jim, just wondering about the conflict. So Ngāi Tahu have submitted something, but if the iwi is representing Warunaka, what happened? Is there necessarily a conflict there because there's differentiation in the tribe?
Yeah, so yeah, Stu, that's a good point. I guess that probably with a panel member considers they have a conflict is actually their call, not necessarily a staff member call. The feedback that we have had is that representatives would sometimes feel uncomfortable considering an application where Ngāi Tahu is an applicant or a submitter. Ultimately, that comes down to the decision making. There's a bit of a perception element, so I guess like to have a panel where the board perception would be that it's going to be the panel. But I think it makes a good point that someone being Ngāi Tahu doesn't automatically exclude them from participating in a panel, but it probably comes down to their call and also the call of objectivity in the particular circumstance.
This has come up before and we did go ahead with our representative. I just wonder if it's been fleshed out as much as it could be. I mean, there's a little bit of clarity from my point of view. I don't know how we go about getting a ruling or getting some more clarity on that issue, but I would like to know, because rather than just leaving it in their hands, we also need to be aware of the potentials.
Can I just relate to the consent applications that I've seen that we have submissions from locally as well as Ngāi Tahu or backing each other up, and they perceive that they have a conflict, and that's the important issue. It's not one that we're creating.
Really, Mr. Chairman, there's probably, and Mr. Holst might want to comment on this, there's some broader work that we're doing on the way we structure decision-making panels and probably putting a little bit more structure around that. At the moment, I have an existing delegation to basically a delegation from council to appoint hearing panels, which from a point of view of keeping things moving, because there's a lot of pressure on time was it is, you know, that's quite a convenient or quick way to do it. But there's some elements of that that could be subject to some challenge. So we're doing some work in this space and we'll bring that back through to council in due course.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor Robert. So we have a motion that the minutes of that previous meeting of this committee are a true and correct record. Is there any further discussion or questions? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Thank you for that. We come to ordinary and urgent business, none. Supplementary reports, I don't have any. Questions? Haven't been notified of any. It doesn't stop you asking them, but it would be helpful if questions are notified to the chair prior to the meeting so that we have an opportunity to prepare an answer if we don't know right off the top of the heads. Chairman and councillor reports. No report from me, none from councillors. Okay, so item 1 of the General Manager's report is the biosecurity and regulatory report.
Thank you, Chair. Ali's not able to be here today. She's away out of the region. So we'll take the report as read. I think Bruce and myself, if there are any questions, we'll do our best to respond to them. But I'll say the report's read and any questions.
We don't have, just about the clean vessel passes, we don't have a continuous presence in Fiordland, even though boats are coming and going all the time. So we use other agencies. Like our own harbour master can't be living over in Fiordland and be speaking vessels all the time. That's impractical. I'm really like that.
Yeah, I understand it. Yeah, Bruce can answer that.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we do have a network of contacts in that Fiordland area. As you say, it is a constant challenge for us in terms of compliance and just general monitoring in a range of areas. The fact that we don't have a presence regularly in an area of something 200 k's away from the coast sort of thing, so it's not a small challenge. We quite regularly get contact from some of the parties that do have a physical presence in there, and they're quite proactive in flagging concerns, and that's useful for us. So those networks are appreciated.
Thank you. Councillor Guyton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question, not from the report particularly, but a biosecurity, I guess. Question. It came up in yesterday's meeting, the use of drones for the management of wildlife crimes. Is there documentation or has any work been done on the restraints or the use of that drone technology for killing trees? Because it sounds like an emerging technology which could be deployed very quickly, and yet who's got oversight over that? So enabling somebody or an agency to kill trees at will, so to speak, with modern technology like that, particularly one that's obviously going to be using AI of some sort.
I'm struggling a wee bit here, Councillor Guyton, about whether that's actually relevant to the agenda for this meeting.
Well, it's a biosecurity report. I'm just wondering if there is anything that you know of anything in train.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I can answer slightly, but then probably have to defer to Ali and her team to come back with a bit more detail. But we have had through the consents team some contact about using this type of technology for pest eradication, not specifically fines, but generally. And obviously it's an emerging technology that can enable things to happen much more quickly, particularly in areas that are inaccessible. So, as to the sort of efficacy of the actual way of doing it, is it the best way to kill the pest species? I can't really comment on that, but we can bring you back some further information. But certainly it's something we are getting some contact on. There's a whole other suite of methods that cover drones under civil aviation requirements and that sort of thing. And the operators need to meet that, which is a separate piece of legislation sitting outside of the RMA process.
Like this, drones enabled to destroy mammals.
Yeah,
Because that's a fairly serious issue, and I haven't heard any discussion about
I
it.
can't comment on that. I can certainly bring you back some information.
Yeah, I think it's just such an emerging technology that I think some of those inevitable questions will be asked and will need to be some work done in the future.
So Pinus contorta is on the list. Yes.
Yes.
Also, that's relevant. Okay.
I would add actually, we are working to include the rabbit exemptions on the list. We try to bring you a comprehensive list of exemptions under the biosecurity and the regional pest management plan. Hopefully we'll have the numbers for the exemptions for the rabbit exemptions by the next meeting. So that's attempt to update the table with you.
Yes, Chairman Hall.
Yes, I see again your pets on this list, but further to Robert's query that these drones can also be used to identify cats, stoats, etc., because they can fly over and photograph them. They're not exterminating them on the spot, but they can actually, it will be a useful tool in actually
So we haven't actually got killer drones out there at the moment.
Yeah, but far as we know.
And some of this technology is still in its infancy, it just shows how quickly that technology and the ability for for a swarm of drones to know exactly where each other. Well, it's very sci-fi, I thought, but we're definitely on those things in the future, and obviously there'll be the privacy things we can. You would have permission to fly a drone over private property, but it's something to watch. It'll be more efficient than somebody on a skid helicopter trying to spot spray. I'm not inclined, for instance, if you could do it much cheaper. Mind you, $1 million for those big drones. Yeah, I'm not buying one for Lambing Beach anytime soon.
How big is big?
No, it would be size of the table or one.
Just 1.5 meters wide, 1.5 meters wide.
There are 2 or 3 different sized drones that we saw the other day. But the big one, which obviously could either take two tanks electric, but they could be you could fill one with petrol if you wanted to, or you could spray another. But it's still at the very much at the infancy stage, and a lot of testing to be done before they're going to be going out and doing anything really. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. So developing area of knowledge for us. Do we have any other questions or commentary around the biosecurity regulatory report season? If not, do we have somebody who'd like to move the recommendation? Hearing, Powell, seconded by Gibson. Thank you. Any other discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye. One against. Carried. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the consents division report. Halligan.
Firstly, apologies, it's quite a long report this time. Apologies for that, but there was a lot of legislative change in the last quarter, so trying to just make sure we covered that content. So I'll take the report as read, but probably just highlight a few things that have developed since the report was written and approved. Firstly, move on to page 13 of your agenda, and I talked about an application by the Southern District Council for short-term consent for the Winton wastewater system. And that's been publicly notified with submissions closing on 15th August. Subsequent to that, we've had a similar application for the FCC Edendale Wyndham Storage Scheme, which has also been publicly notified with submissions closing on the 30th of August. So a number of these wastewater systems are getting to the end of their current consent term, and Southern District Council has been seeking a short-term sort of bridging type consent while they do some further investigations for long-term options. So just want to make you aware of that. Sort of moving on page 14, I talked about the Contact Energy wind farm proposal in East London. And the date for the site visit, the workshop which was being finalised, it had been finalised for a site visit on the 9th of August. And you might have seen the Contact's been holding some public meetings out in the area, got some media coverage today. Earlier this week. Again, as I said, outlined some legislative reform. Hopefully that's reasonably self-explanatory, but there's been a lot happening in this quarter. So it's been reasonably challenging for staff to get their head around some of these quite significant new regulatory instruments and what they mean for their day-to-day processes. And also been trying to engage with other departments and also with their consultant sector. And make sure that they're aware of some of these changes and factor into applications, etc. One in particular on page 14 that is a significant document for not just consents but the wider organisation is the National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity. I think I remember seeing a first draft of that about 1996, and so it's had a long gestation, but now landed with us for implementation. And some of the matters are a longer term thing around the regional biodiversity strategy, which Ellie and her team will be leading, but various teams will have to contribute to. But it does have some immediate implications for people who want to do new activities that have implications on Indigenous biodiversity. So it's elevated the bar for those types of applications sort of instantly. So we just need to be aware of that, and we've also made our consultant sector aware of that in case they weren't already. Probably moving on to page 15, sort of touched on an ongoing challenge we have, and our key challenges is around capacity and workforce. We've had a couple of senior level vacancies in the team for some time now. Into the market a few times on those without success. We're sort of covering that gap at the moment with some use of some external resource if and as required, and we're managing to maintain compliance with process and timeframes, but it is reasonably fragile, so it's something we've got to keep an ongoing eye on. It's a national issue. If you talk to any other regional district council, you'll find they've got pretty much the same issue as a lot of the private sector as well. And again, in that key challenges, an ongoing challenge for us is customers understandably want some level of business certainty around their activities and what they need to do to future-proof themselves. And at the moment, it's quite difficult for us to provide definitive advice about where some of the future focus work may be heading, like where plan change to Otahi may land, etc. So we sometimes have to qualify our advice a wee bit, which can be a bit frustrating for a customer because they quite understandably want some certainty. Well, I'm here now, where do I need to get to in the future? So there's no easy answer to that one, but just so you're aware that's still an ongoing issue. Just move through, talk about a little bit of probably some other matters. Obviously, you may have seen yesterday some publicity on the release of the Haranui Agriculture fast track consent decision from the EPA independent panel, which declined that application. And there's an appeal period to the High Court, which by my calculation should finish on the 23rd of August. So I can't say too much while that appeal period is running. But we have put out some publicity from a environment Southland perspective on our perspectives on that decision, which I don't think has been captured by the media as yet, but probably will come through in the next couple of days. So that's, if you're already aware of that, I can send the full copy of the decision, which is a meaty 230-page document, but I'm happy to circulate that if you're interested in seeing it.
Yeah. I'd like to see it.
Other than
that particular.
Yes, you can.
Just that now that they have to go to the High Court, the idea was that it was a shortened process, this PA process. Where does that leave the situation now? Are they going to end up with involved in a longer process than they would have been had they gone through the usual channels?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I better be a little bit careful on this. The High Court appeal process is one option that the applicant has now. Another option could be potentially to lodge the application. Well, the application was lodged with us originally, and Otahu Seafoods made the call during that process to follow the COVID fast track legislative provisions, which became operative after the application had originally been lodged with us. So when the application was lodged with us, that wasn't an option because that legislative option didn't exist. But once it was available, they made a call to go down that pathway. Another potential option would be to relodge the application as a conventional consent application.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the applicants have indicated they're considering the decision, so I don't think we should be speculating on any further on what the outcomes might be.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, further to that, the COVID fast track process defines who the parties to a particular process are.
Yep.
And there's the applicant and ourselves, obviously, but there's also a lot of other parties who also have the same appeal rights. So that appeal period's running at the moment.
Carry on.
No questions.
I've got a couple. Councillor Gibson, you had a question?
Yeah, there was a wee bit of things floating around regarding the cost of consents. There was a letter that came to us regarding that. And I see in here that you've got your consents group of consultants where you talk about all these things. What's the outcome? What was the reasoning behind the difference in cost between here and the COGA?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, each council obviously has a schedule of fees and charges that are notified, and we do a little bit of the various relative to other councils. The air processes and their planning provisions are a little bit different from Otago and from other parts of New Zealand. So in our decision-making process, we have to make sure that we have covered all elements of our planning documents. Certainly not setting out to impose unnecessary costs on applicants, but you can have regional variations just because of the nature of the legislative instruments you're dealing with. Obviously, the national standards are exactly that, they're national things, so they apply right across New Zealand. But we do have plan provisions that Otago don't have, and Environment Canterbury plan provisions are different from ours, etc. So, and also each region has some different structures around even liaison. And Tangata Whenua have indicated that they did want to be involved in some of the intensive winter grazing processes. So we've factored that into our process as well. Of the consents that we've processed so far, there have been some of the more complex ones that have been cost more than the deposit, but 11 of the intensive winter grazing consents we've processed have provided a refund to the applicant. So it sort of depends on the quality of the application, what's involved in terms of the nature and scale of the activity, and the costs do vary quite a bit, but please rest assured we don't set out to impose unnecessary costs on anybody. By the same token, council's made an principal decision around fees and charges that applicants should pay for the cost of processing their consent, not the general rate payer.
The other question I had is 11 water consents on the Mataura. Now I'm conflicted. Where are we up to there? Because in my view, that was all sorted away back in May.
Yes, through Mr. Chair, this holds my comment as well. In terms of the process, there's been some extensive dialogue, and I think, as I perfectly understand it, some really good collaboration and cooperation from existing consent holders about how we could reach a collective regime to bring the current allocation within the Mataura Water Conservation Order. That dialogue's been ongoing. It would then need to move through to the formalisation of any reallocation into the issue of new consents. So they're all in a review process at the moment.
And just to add to that, there will be an update to council in the next council meeting on that.
Did I hear a date?
That, whatever the next council meeting is, I'm not sure of the date of the next council meeting. So yes.
The intention of the process there was for the whole of those consents to work their way through the issues, rather than somebody making a ruling and forcing a conclusion. I think that's actually worked really well. Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, that's one of my questions. So we were at a good debate in regards to that. A couple of questions here. The town in the short term consent, what length with town? What are they expecting?
The applications that we have at the moment are seeking 5-year consents. One of the difficulties with that is there's been some case law from the Environment Court which says that you can't sort of discount adverse environmental effects because they're short term. So reaching quite consent, certainly understand that pragmatism of seeking those, but we also have to consider those in the context of the legislation. So we can get for the moment, those have been published in those.
And just another one in regards to the freshwater farm plans. Are we working through the, I don't know what's going on there in regards to obviously the farm plan versus consent? Are we, is it clear there has been talk that if, at the end of the day, farm plans will have to adhere to every regulation and you didn't put that into farm plans? Is that generally correct? And just versus, you know, there's going to be obviously questions about why we got consents and got the freshwater farm plan, which actually we've got to work towards all the rules from regulations. So are we, is there any sign that consents will drop off if we've got all the freshwater farm plans coming in play into the future? And we looking ahead that we're going to have 2 documents that some people might have to have, but probably actually one covers like everything anyway. That's what I'm asking, if you know what I'm talking about.
Really, Mr. Chairman, yeah, you would anticipate under the freshwater farm regulations, certifier should be identifying relevant provisions that a farm plan has to cover and dealing with those instances where they don't, in terms of, what other mitigations and proposed to deal with that. At the moment, I think the interrelationship between freshwater farm plans and the consent process is a little bit unclear, bearing in mind the status of the water and land plan. I remember sort of way back there was talk that the farm plan regime may eventually sort of supersede the large range of farming related consents that we currently deal with. We're not quite there yet in terms of where we're at with our planning documents. So it could be an evolutionary thing. I'm not sure that's a very definitive answer.
Yeah, I know, I'm just,
Something to do at the moment.
it's always good to have that on the table, because let's talk about efficiency, even with ourselves and here, and also the community dealing with these regulations. There's only going to be more regulations coming. Just in regards to, obviously, it's good to point out, Councillor Gibson bringing up the cost difference between Otago and Southern, and I know I'll talk to Bruce about this, is that we've got two different levels of regulation. The plans that we've got, we're a lot more advanced, or our bar's a lot higher in regards to the regulation, whereas ORC seem to be catching up. Is that a nice way to say it?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that's mostly at the moment Otago only have the National Environmental Standard provisions to deal with, although they are advanced in their water and land plans. So whether that remains the same or not, but we have a sort of a two-tier system where a consent application has to, for intensive winter grazing, has to deal with the National Environmental Standards as well as the provisions of their planning documents. We've got to consider those and make a decision.
Councillor Ludlam.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm just interested in the intensive winter grazing application numbers and whether you're surprised at the number received. And what learnings we might take for next season.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Good question. I guess initially there was some suggestion right across the country we would have many thousand intensive winter grazing applications, and while we've had more than some other regions, significantly more, I think the numbers nationally have been quite low, and a number of people have either looked to work within the permitted activity criteria, and there's some use of alternative things like pasture-based wintering or grass bale wintering, whatever you want to call it, which at the moment doesn't need any consent requirements, but that may change. And I think probably there's been a few learnings for us. It's been pretty new for everybody, I guess. And probably one of those would be making sure that our material on our website and guidance material is as crystal clear as it can possibly be. We did some work on that at the start. We did some testing with the rural sector. There's still been some smaller pain points. So yeah, I think there's some learnings in that respect and communication aspect of it. It's been, something that I don't think has been terrible, but there's probably some improvement opportunities.
Thanks.
Chairman Hurrell.
Is what is commenting on the reasonably accurate headline in the Southern Times, which actually looks like we've withdrawn abatement notices. That they've only been withdrawn because people are now compliant, because they've actually applied and received either an employee activity or resource consent. I've had a number of calls from both sides of the spectrum saying, and I said, look, don't believe the headline. If you read the whole article, you realise that we are actually trying to enforce the law as fairly and as well as we can. So well done to staff. The other, I won't comment on the actual application, which I can't, but a number of concerns do arise with that decision, as we've been told in the past. The EPA could do all these big consents. And once again, we're seeing a lack of, probably without reading it, a lack of regional flavour, and I think we do need to keep pushing to have regional decisions made. And the other is the status. We're told we must honour the treaty. We've got the Ngāi Tahu Settlement Act. I guess my question here through my head is, where does that lie in amongst the regulatory hierarchy that's sitting there? Obviously, it must have status, so that I'm sure there's going to be a number of questions going forward on this one, but I certainly was quite surprised at that decision.
Well, the government appointed the commissioners in this particular case.
Through Mr. Chairman, just comment very briefly on those two things. In terms of the regional input, we were asked to nominate a representative to that panel, which was Sharon McGarry, who is an ex-Southlander and has done extensive work in Southland, and after liaison with Chairman Cook and Chief Executive, we must put that nomination forward. So there is an opportunity for us to have input into the decision-making panel. The other relevant legislation, no target still and others, is discussed in the decision, but obviously something that all the parties will be having a look at.
Before we move on, you raised an issue before about the disparity in consent costs. That was raised by a consultant.
Yes, it was.
Amongst other things, just that was one of the items that was raised. But I see in the report here that we actually have the consent compliance team actually have regular meetings with the consultants. Did you want to talk about that for us?
I did say.
Because I'm just disturbed that they don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we, you know, Bruce's team and Donna's team do meet with them reasonably regularly. And we're open to any feedback, aren't we? And that's a kind of a full, robust conversation when you get together with the rural consultants, Bruce.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, that forum is useful and it's, you know, robust dialogue at times, but it's generally professional and collaborative. And, you know, they're not the enemy as far as we're concerned. It's important that we work with the sector and, you know, happy for those types of concerns be raised either myself directly or through that forum. No, that's a reasonable question to ask.
But it seems strange that they're coming outside that forum and writing letters to councillors. That was a bit.
Yeah.
How, the other thing that I was looking at is my question.
You can go for it, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. On the 9th of August, there's a site visit to the wind farm. And I see, are we invited as councillors or council?
The invitation was to staff. I'm not attending myself, but one of my team is, and 3 people on the biodiversity team. And also Tara Marama representatives are present. There wasn't an invitation beyond that. It does involve the helicopter visit, so there's some limited capacity in terms of the helicopter itself. And obviously I've requested, contact are organising it, requested a health and safety plan from them, haven't seen that as yet, but well, I don't think anyone from their organisation will be attending until such time as we've seen a health and safety plan and we've approved it.
Councillor McFarlane.
Yeah, just a interesting thing in regards to that topic. All of a sudden we've got 8 or 9 big windmills you can see from town and Gore now, which came as a surprise to me. I thought I had a big level way out back of Clyware somewhere, and they're right basically on our doorstep. It was amazing, just over one day, bang, these big quite amazing. Well, they are. They're quite unique, but there was actually a context thing, you know, they were going to be out feeling like I knew they were being built away quite a wee way out, but they're actually reasonably close to the town. So there is that visual aspect of some of the stuff that's going on. I'm not against it, but it's actually whether the community actually knows, you know, when you talk about that's only, how many is there, 8 or 9, 10 at Clyware?
Stage
They're
1.
talking about 50. Well, is there more? There obviously is more, isn't there? Just that visual aspect of looking at these things. Some might think it's nice, but some might put a ruin in the landscape too. So, but
the big tree.
yeah.
So is the application going to be made to us or to a district council?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as you might have seen in the article, the contact made an application to go through the EPA fast track process, somewhat to what Ananui just done. That was approved by the minister, so they have the opportunity to go down that path, but they've stated publicly they haven't decided that as yet. If it's not a fast track application, or even if it is, they need regional and district consents, and the visual elements get dealt with through the district part of it. We don't deal with visual effects through our planning documents. The Gwyera farm development, which Mercury are now doing, was consented 2009, so it's been around for a while as a proposal. So that's why you haven't seen anything about the consent part of it recently, because existing consents were held.
This a review of the regional coastal plan was mentioned back on earlier part of your report. When's that review going to start? I have a reason for asking, just how long was that process likely to take?
I'll probably need to get some more specifics from the policy and planning team, Mr. Chairman. That question gets asked of me recently regularly. Marine Guardians and a number of others are very interested in the progression of that. It's one of our largest planning documents. If you've seen our current regional coastal plan, which was made operative in 2013, but started in about 1998 as processes. It's a big thing. It's going to need the size of a phone book, so that's not good comparison these days. The phone book's not very big, but it's a big document. And there's some meaty issues in the coastal space, so it'll be a multi-year process.
And there are some other matters which are dependent on that review and the outcome. Yes.
Yeah, so if I can just chip in with, I want to say the end of next year. I've got 2024, 2025 in my brain, but it's got to be done
When it commences.
quite soon. It'll be finished quite soon.
Mr. Chairman, if you like, I could get an indicative time frame on the policy planning thing.
It would be of interest to know that, Bruce, if you could help with that one. And any other questions or commentary regarding that report? Thank you, Chairman Hall. Seconded by Dr. Rodway. Thank you. There's no further questions or commentary. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Harry, thank you for your full report. The next item is the compliance report. Donna. And we've already mentioned the headline, which indicates we're back down on those notices we issued. That's not the case, is it?
No, it's not quite the case. So through you, Mr. Chair, the abatement notices were lifted after the recipients did all activities that were required by the abatement notices. And there are many, many ways to comply. So they could have just removed the slot from SCOPE or from CSAs. They could have applied for a DPA or a consent. There's a lot of avenues to be able to comply. They were lifted once they were complied with.
Thank you. I think we just need to make sure that the media clarify that was the media. Some editor has written the headline, which gives an entirely erroneous take on it. But would you like to go along with the rest of your report? I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted that point made.
I'll take the report as read. I'll just highlight a few bits and pieces that have happened since the report was written and submitted. On page 20, I've mentioned synthetic nitrogen reporting. So this is year 2 of the new reporting requirement for dairy farmers. To date, we've had approximately 600 submissions come through the 3 central tools reported back to council. That's similar to the number of reports we got at year end last year. Reporting that comes back to us is 1 week behind. So we're waiting for next week's report to get a final number by the due date, which was last Monday. After that, we'll enter all the data and we'll start following up with anyone who hasn't supplied data the same as we did last year. On page 21, I've spoken around intensive winter grazing, and I also wanted to mention the 5 abatement notices which were lifted, not cancelled. So thank you, Councillor Cook. And we have tentative dates booked for our next winter grazing flight. We're just waiting for an appropriate winter window and sign off from the helicopter pilot to be able to go up. That will be very soon. I've also mentioned Stewart Island and Marine Farm monitoring. So I just want to acknowledge the 2 members of my staff who are currently on Stewart Island and have had a very tumultuous and bouncy week out on the seas, along with the 3 from the maritime team. But from all accounts, it's been a very positive and proactive trip over there. And we've seen a lot of really, really good stuff and an increase in compliance from previous times. There's still some marine farms to be looked at on the way back in today, as well as a couple of moorings. I've also spoken on page 21, which runs through to 22, around the notification timeframe for dairy farm inspections. So as a quick summary, historically, we used to just call when we arrived at the dairy shed in previous years. This last year, we extended that out and called from the previous property or from the office just before we left. So that gave anywhere between sort of 15 to 30 minutes up to a couple of hours, depending on how far we were travelling. We've taken the opportunity now that we are growing the dairy program and separating that out a little bit to review those notification timeframes, and we've come up with an option to trial for the coming season, which is an extension on that again. At the start of the season, a letter will be sent out to all consent holders outlining the number of inspections that their consent actually says is appropriate. That doesn't necessarily mean we'll be there that number of times, but a lot of consent holders aren't aware of the number of inspections that are noted in their consent. We're also going to do a little bit of what we used to call a dairy pack, so a few reminders in there as well. And we want to really advertise the Dairy Top Performer program and encourage people to have high compliance so they can participate in that. And then we will be doing a phone call from the monitoring officer the afternoon or the evening before their scheduled visit. So that's around 24 hours notice minimum. We'll be giving them moving forward. The reason for that was we are conscious that if we make that call and people are waiting and they get prepared for us, but we have a failed inspection first thing in the morning, that's a lot of people waiting around for us that don't necessarily need to be. So we want to take a season and be pragmatic about the notification timeframe and see if it actually works for dairy farmers, and then feed that back in at the end of next season for another review. On page 22, I've also spoken about fish screen monitoring. This is one of the projects we've been doing as a part of a 5-year plan. So across 5 years, we've decided we're looking at this consent condition, which hadn't previously been very well looked at. And so we've split the 74 consents that have a fish screen monitoring condition on it, and we've done 15 this season. So far this season, 4 were non-compliant, 4 were compliant with fully effective fish screens, and 7 were compliant but ineffective. Now, the ineffective and the non-compliances are due to the low sweep velocity rates and aperture sizes. So frequently the fish can still get in through the screens or they get stuck against them. Part of that is a technical report, and we're working with those consent holders to make sure that they come compliant within set timeframes. And those timeframes will also be very dependent on the expenditure and going to replace those screens. And on page 24, I've mentioned committed activities, but there is another item, so I'm going to have that and discuss that later in the meeting.
Thanks, Ron. Yes, Councillor Rodway.
Thank you. So I've got 4 questions, although you did deal with one about fish passes. I can just want a little bit more clarity on it now. First one relates to the Dairy Top Performer. This sounds very good. I don't know too much about it, but is that in conjunction with the dairy companies like Fonterra? Fonterra have a system where they require their farmers to be compliant and all that sort of thing. So is it coordinated with that in any way?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's similar in that they get less inspections from us, and we do report to those supply companies who's on that Dairy Top Performer program each year. So they do have that information, but we don't coordinate the program as such with them.
So you don't feel there's any duplication occurring there that could be avoided? If Fonterra are doing a good job, why would we need to do it? That's what I'm sort of asking.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the initial reason for starting up the Dairy Top Performer was to acknowledge those who are doing a really good job and to reduce the number of inspections that we actually have on the property. So it's a reward for doing a good job, and they do a self-assessment sheet at the end of a season, and then we select 15% QA to make sure that everything is okay on farm. So it's not a complete duplication. We think it works in alignment with the supply companies at this stage.
Yeah, my thinking is that we talked about it yesterday, or I talked about it yesterday, getting the the companies, whether they're the dairy companies or the meat companies or the fertilizer companies, to become a lot more involved in getting their clients to do the right thing, whatever it is. Which takes a bit of pressure off us, takes the media focus off us, and puts it back more openly on the people who are basically running the industry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we've just reinstated what we call the CDAG group. So it's the Southern Dairy Agricultural Effluent Group. And it's attended by Fonterra and MPI, and the other companies are coming on board shortly. And in that group, it's discussed who's doing a great job, who's not, what industry can be doing rather than us. So that those discussions are being had on a monthly basis.
Thanks. The second one was about fish springs. I'm reasonably familiar with these, but I wonder, you say that some were compliant and effective, 4 were compliant and effective, 7 were compliant but ineffective. How do you tell the difference? And can you, I don't imagine you can, monitor whether or not fish are actually stopped from going through these screens, ending up in the code?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we saw no evidence, to the best of my knowledge, that there were any fish stuck in there while we were there or been through there. But so we're following the environmental standard guidelines for monitoring as overseen by someone who's done this work previously at Environment Canterbury, and they are a technical expert, and so they're reviewing all of those reports with consent holders to make sure that they are as fully effective and useful for the recipient as possible. We want those reports to be easily used by the consent holders to become compliant.
All right, thank you. Now, next one was about gravel monitoring, and I wonder how is the amount of gravel taken being monitored? Talked a bit about this annual plan process. We had submitters from the gravel industry saying that they would do gravel to be measured by weight rather than by volume. So I just want to know at the moment, how are we ensuring that the amount that they're taking is what they say they are taking?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So this is the first quarter where the compliance team have gone out and done the monitoring. So as we go around, we're learning each site and getting to know each consent holder as we go. Effectively, the monitoring of the extraction is almost on an honorary system. So they extract it, they fill in their form, they pay us, and then we add that to the consent. Then when we go out to each site, we'll look to see whether or not we can see any difference in the size of the piles. It's an area of growth in the monitoring program that we've identified, and we just have to put.
And I think the conversation that came through the annual plan, the difference between volume and weight, that's something that we can explore again through the LTP if there's some benefits.
Yeah, so I was wondering, how accurate the volume measurement is, and it sounds like a little bit subjective. Yeah. The last question, Mr. Chairman, about wintering barns and pads, and I'm wondering what's the staff experience of how well these are being managed. The pad generally, the pads with being managed and looked after well, as opposed to them being poorly looked after.
Mr. Chair, I can say so far this season they are being managed much better than they have in previous seasons. I can come back with exact numbers, but in previous seasons, nearly every second inspection was a grade 10 or a significant non-compliance, and I think we've had 1 to date so far this season. So that's a good sign of good management.
All right, thank you very much.
There's 4 questions, Mike. Do we have any other questions? There's.
Just to add to Councillor Rodway's the thing of getting a common database, I think, is where he's coming from. And really, if we look at our constituents out there, they need that because they get peeved off, I was going to say something else, with filling it in four different places and it all going in. It needs to just end up in one place, I think. The other thing that I want to question is the nitrogen reports that you're getting are only for dairy farmers, am I right? Mm-hmm. So the sheep and beef farmers can put on as much as they wish.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the regulation only requires dairy farmers at this stage. And it does say at this stage to supply that data. What is decided on in the future, we're unsure.
Is there legislation by Mr. Parker?
So it's not,
Okay, so we
it's
can't
not
move
council.
So with the thing that's going on at the moment regarding the abatement notices, do we starve it for oxygen or do we go back and correct it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe the comms team have already had conversations around the cancelled versus adopted.
So there will be some sort of reply.
The headline was misleading, but the context of the wording under that, which some people don't go to, actually did explain the reasons for the withdrawals.
Sorry, actually, if I can just talk about the nitrogen where you said about putting the data into 4 places, is that what you're referring
Well,
to?
the farmers out there at the moment have to put it into their company they're selling to, you know, and places. And you're
Multiple, yeah, we are one.
and I'm just going to get another 2, but they're getting peeved off at that. And in the end, if we have all them upset, we just don't get it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do acknowledge that, and at this stage, 3 central tools is the avenue that has been chosen by central government for the data to go into. However, and conversations are still happening with industry and with them around whether or not we can get the data from somewhere else. So, for example, if it's given to Fonterra or Open Country, they can supply it to us, so it will be one. So those conversations are still live.
Councillor McPhail.
We'll have one more nitrogen report as of last night. But I like it, to be honest, I'll see personal approach that actually works not too bad. It's just a matter of having your settings right and just we technical data. But it took a couple of days to sort out, but it wasn't too strenuous, but it's just another report we have to do at the moment. And I'm not over 190 kilos, so that's good. No, terrible. Just in regards to the winter grazing, actually, it was just one of the paper notices that said to issue to remove stock and sediment runoff. Is that correct? It says there they have to remove the sediment as well.
Oh, I think that was in relation to the infringement notice. So we had a lot of runoff in that instance.
So they actually went and removed, like, took the sediment away.
They wanted it in the ridge.
And the other thing I was very appreciate, I'm sure people will appreciate the in regards to the dairy top performer and also the time, because it's obviously been quite an issue from some people in regards to turning up at the gates and saying we're here to do it. So hopefully that it's a step in the right direction. I think that's good to show that we are listening and understanding, and also the workloads and everything everybody's dealing with. And also in the future, it's just more regulation. So it's how we work with the community and these consent holders is hugely important. Just a note, just to clarify for Myers that there is about 90 odd in the top dairy performers already.
Mr. Chair, there was last season.
Yeah, it was last season.
We're currently doing the numbers for this season, doing those checks, so I'm not sure where this is at the moment.
So when you indicate was it 80? Is it 80 more?
So we potentially last year when we forecast forward, if everyone who was at 4 years was fully compliant for 5th year, there'd be an additional 80 if everyone remained at this compliant status.
Yeah. And just to clarify that this is for this season that they can apply, you're putting a letter out for this season. So these changes are
coming from, well, so for us, we are saying season starts about the start of September.
Yeah, so they'll be notified of this if they want to get involved and everything. So it's just clarified that it's for this season that we're actually making these changes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, they'll receive, if they're new to the Dairy Top Performer program, they get a phone call to explain what the program is and give them some time to think about it, and either come back to us or we'll follow up. It's voluntary, so if they choose to participate, we then go through the next stage and they get something in writing to hold on to. Because we acknowledge that that's always quite handy for banks and companies. And then if they choose not to, we just put a note on file and we'll either call them back next year, or if they want out completely, we do that
That's all good. And just in regards to the dairy inspections, just when we talk about low risk non-compliance, moderate non-compliance, significant non-compliance, it was good. I can't remember if I've ever seen it, but actually given an example of what some of those compliance, just so you understand what actually, I don't know, just be an of interest to me myself as a dairy farmer.
So I can circulate some examples through you, Mr. Chair, but a technical non-compliance or a grade 2 is usually paperwork related. So a form, a PIC hasn't been updated, or an annual review of your management plans haven't been done. A grade 5 could be, you know, a minor bit of sludge or ponding on a laneway, or just when an irrigator's been turned off, a very, very small amount of ponding, which we've got some scope for, which is measured, and a significant non-compliance is usually overland flow or severe ponding.
Actually, just of interest in regards to winter growth, sorry, I'm going back to winter growth and look at my rainfall data. This is one of the wettest Julys we've had in the last 10 years. Only 2016 equals it. So, and from a encouraging, I mean, it's been a difficult winter, but for me personally, seeing what we're doing now than we did 10 years ago, sort of, I know it's plan A, plan C, we're sort of going through the alphabet, but at the moment trying to make things as good as we can, but understanding that it's actually very wet. Dealing with that, it's quite good to see what all the good management practices are benefiting the environment, I would say, anyway, under trying conditions. That's what I'm trying to say. So, all good.
Thank you. Councillor McDonald has a question. I put his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just pulling up on that, what Jeremy's just said about intensive winter grazing and around compliance at the moment. And it's quite an unusual situation that we have these really intense periods, don't we? And Jeremy's just highlighted that. My question is around training for staff and upskilling, you know, because we are in a different phase of society now. There seems to be more division, more social division. There's more people are a lot more tense out there, and we're seeing it through society, aren't we? So I get to my question is there further training or upskilling for staff around things like de-escalation techniques? And you know, what I'm talking about is probably outside support as opposed to inside support from the council. Do you provide that for the staff for these to deal with these intense times? Not, you know, so yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. So to become a warranted officer, to be able to go out and do those inspections, there is a suite of training that an officer must go through and be proven competent in before they're given their warrant. And then upon receiving their warrant, they go through a shadowing process where they're overseen by now a senior, because we've just developed seniors in our team, or it could be another very experienced officer who's gone through lots of checks and is doing well. And each year, officers go through what we call our CERT communications course. So it's around de-escalation techniques and working with the public and that sort of training. And that each year is tailored towards examples of what we've been having in the field. So we can feed to the trainer some situations and we can run through them in a training environment as well.
Okay, just a supplementary to that, if I could please, Mr. Chairman. So those courses you're saying they're being modified to fit the current environment that we find ourselves in, that we all know we're in post-COVID around this. So you're quite comfortable that it's addressing these issues, these modern issues current issues that we're facing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're always looking for other training opportunities, but what we also do, that main one is with people who are well trained and really well versed in this de-escalation, and it's training that's also given out to Ministry of Justice and police and security teams as well. So it is a really good solid baseline, but what we also do each year is sit and look internally at what training options we can do, and we are looking at reinvigorating our annual training where we will bring in trainers to look at some more topical things as well as being able to tweak that structured framework of training that we have.
Oh, that's really good. So you're quite confident you have good consistency right across the group then and dealing with these issues, these, I'd call pretty intense issues, aren't they?
It's very intense, and there's always room to grow training opportunities, but at this stage I'm confident that opportunities are there to keep staff safe while they're out there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, just to add to that, the consents team also go through that CERT external training program, which is very good. We've done it. It is really good. The element worth being aware of is that it's sort of like a first aid certificate. You don't do it and forget about it. You've got to recertify at defined intervals. So the course is evolving, and the providers have commented themselves sort of on the line of what Councillor McDonald's saying, that the operating environment is changing all the time with pressures on society, so they're modifying their content to reflect that. And it's a really good process around how you engage with people, but also how you disengage if things aren't going well, and sort of make sure that health safety aspects are provided for both sides, not just for the staff, but also for if there's a party who's in a particularly bad space, that you're not trying to push them on something that is not helpful for them either.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Chairman Hall.
Yes, Jeremy sort of covered it, but thank you for putting the intent of it in for good practice. It's comments were made. Thank you for listening, and we're trialling that. Really good. The 190 kg thing, when it was the end of life, people knew it when it was announced, and it is very targeted on dairy farming at the moment. But the heat seems to have gone out of it. People seem to be finding that, well, actually, price was another great incentive not to put on as much as they had been in the past. And the feedback I'm getting is, surprise, we're still getting production. So you, when you put it on, how you put it on, all those sort of things are helping. And if we've got 600 odd out of what, 800 odd perhaps, that's a pretty good result. And again, one comment Morris made about industries being involved, if the fertiliser companies can submit it straight to us, it's a pretty seamless process and it shouldn't cause too much angst. So that appears to be going reasonably well. We are ahead of where we were last year, by the sound of it, or about the same.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're on par at what data we've got at this stage. When the data comes through next week, we're hoping we'll have enough to push us over a higher submission rate than last year.
Thank you for that. Is there any further questions or commentary of the compliance division report? If not, would somebody like to move the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Rodway. Seconded by Councillor McPhail. No further discussion. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Eric, thank you for your report, Don. Item 4, for your operational regulatory framework.
Yes, I'm going to, I'll just introduce it. I'll Nick joins the table, and I'm going to, I have to leave and I'll swap over with Bruce up here. But the purpose of the operational regulatory framework is really to ensure consistency across all of our regulatory functions, and where possible look for opportunities to integrate or align or share approaches and practices. So this was normally this is again an operational thing, but we thought you might find of interest some of the journey we've been on to develop this framework, and you might find some of the stuff that we've done of interest as well. So I'll leave it at that and let Nick take you through the presentation. And I'll also bid you farewell as I have to just step out to meet you.
Yeah, thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so this sort of came about as following on from when we sort of transferred to the new, this was a couple of years ago, when we brought a lot of teams together and under the integrated catchment management unit or group. One of the things that was identified was that we are a regulator of many arms, so it's not just one facet that we regulate. So the idea around this was actually putting some consistency around what we're actually delivering. And then also acknowledging, you know, this, as someone's already identified, there's an array of quite increasingly complex responsibilities for us that are coming down from central government. So we need to take that into consideration. Where am I in? Cool. Bottom button. And of course, acknowledging that, you know, the complexity of Southland itself. You know, we are a very large region land-wise, not so much population-wise, but we, you know, we also have a very large agricultural aspect and an increasing number of other industries that are slowly establishing here. So we need to make sure that we're capturing all these sort of things, thinking forward. What we wanted to do was actually develop a bit of a framework for us operationally. So initially this was called a strategic framework that got sort of mixed up with the fact that we have a strategy and policies. We need to change terminologies, but this is really focusing us operationally, how we can prepare best for the future. This is sort of a basis on things around the regulatory environment. This was actually developed by a fellow by the name of Alan Fells, who's the Foundation Dean of the Australian New Zealand School of Government. Talks about the regulatory environment itself. Very important aspect that we need to consider here. So we've got the authorising environment, which is the legislation, the government rules and regulations that we have. We've got the regulatory capability, which is where we come in terms of delivering a regulatory approach, and community value, and the way they interact is very important. So we need to make sure that we're applying things in a fair and consistent way to ensure that the community see the value and the legitimacy of what we deliver. At the same time, there's got to be that confidence in the rules and regulations being fair and aiming at the right thing and reasonable. So there's all these aspects here that interact with the regulatory environment. So we need to take that into consideration around how we operate. So initially we had a bit of a discussion around, well, what do we want to achieve with this? So sort of the purpose is where we cover is make sure that our regulatory components are very efficient, effective and targeted. We've got to make sure that we drive that alignment consistency, because we have acknowledged, you know, we've got these multiple arms and everybody is looking at this, or deliver their regulatory responsibilities in different ways. So we've got to put a bit of a joint face on community around how we deliver this. Also moving towards that outcomes focused aspect of things. You know, this is the new way of looking at things. We're not just talking about ticking the boxes of checklists of we need to meet these outputs. It's really about what do we want to achieve with this and how we actually target our regulatory actions towards those outcomes. We've already touched on talk about drones and things like that earlier, but we need to start thinking about technology in this changing environment and how we can utilise technology going forward for helping us become more efficient and effective in terms of the regulatory delivery. One of the other aspects that's very important is actually that we've already talked about is that communication channel. Is how do we tell our story about the work we do and what we're trying to achieve. You know, we've got to make sure that the community know it. I'll come to a thing later about that. So we did a bit of a brainstorming session amongst the team here and came up with ideas of what are the challenges we're facing. And these are the challenges that we're facing there. You know, we're constantly getting updated policies and procedures and legislation that we need to incorporate. There's change or a drive to improve our data and records, information management, systems control. How do we make sure that our regulatory decision making is fair, and balanced, and consistent? So when we drove all those things and discussed them, we came out with a whole lot of outcomes that we wanted to achieve, and those outcomes quite naturally fell into 4 key themes: tools and technology, alignment, consistency, capacity and capability, and overall just continuous improvement. So then we took a bit of a gap analysis of where we are versus where we wanted to be, and some of these we're looking at the tools and technology, some of these objectives that we're looking at. Technology, as I said, is becoming more prevalent in day-to-day life. We need to be making sure that we're moving with the times in terms of that, to be fair and right. So some of the outcomes we're trying to achieve here is around that, making sure that our analytics are correct, more analytics, better quality. Given the fact that we are field-based in a lot of areas, the mobility and flexibility of what we do is how do we actually adapt to our tools and technology to make us more efficient out in the field. And of course, developing targeted monitoring regimes. Where do we get the best bang for our buck around that? Alignment and consistency. So in line with our integrated catchment management approach, our regulatory functions need to work together a bit more to allow more effective resource allocation and consistency. But some of the things we've been looking at around that is how do we plan our regulatory activities so that we can be more effective out there. For example, Donna's team are going out to look at some area on the winter grazing or something. How does our biodiversity team can fit in with that and do so we're not double handling? It also allows that consistency of approach to the stakeholders out there. Instead of getting 5 different visits, we can try and get 1. We also want to align and be more consistent in the way we work with other regulatory agencies. A lot of working together around that. So, for the example, MPI, WorkSafe, fish, marine area as well. And we're also looking at our important decision-making decisions and how they align. Different legislation have different enforcement actions that we can take, but generally there is a alignment of how they can actually, how do we apply them at different levels. So we need to make sure that we're being fair and consistent across the board. So capacity and capability, Councillor McDonald was talking about before around training, asking around the training capacity. So that's one of the aspects that we're really focusing on in this framework is, how do we lift our training? How do we make it broader? And Don's already covered quite a bit of that earlier around making sure that we're up to date and refreshment training. We want to make sure that our warranting scheme is correct and making sure that people are holding the correct warrants. I'm not saying they don't, but it's around making sure that we have the right people at the right place at the right time. And of course, I think Bruce touched on earlier is that the gap in terms of resources that he has in his team, and this is quite a trend nationwide in terms of finding the right resources and right people to fill our teams in this area and get the right skills in that. So we need to focus on how do we actually get our teams fully capable, but also with our induction process around that to make sure that we're holding on to people longer. And our continuous improvement there. So some of the things we're looking at there is there's this terminology called the regulatory burden. Which I don't know if many of you know about it. The regulatory burden is quite across the board. It applies both to the regulator and the regulated community. So it's around about that costs and input of what we need to do to meet our regulatory requirements. And so one of the things we want to look at is how we can reduce that regulatory burden, both internally for us, but also externally for the people that we're regulating. We're also talking about the funding aspect of things. Is one of the things we want to look at is, you know, are there better funding models about how we actually fund our regulatory? You know, we currently use that cost recovery model. Is that the best way? So it's something we need to look at further on. Is, are there other ways of looking at funding this and our overall cost recovery around that? So those are the key objectives and the themes that we're looking at. From there, we've put together an extensive list of various actions we want to take internally around these. So just touching on some of the things that we've already made a start on. These actions have been we've prioritised them over a sort of a 5-year program, because some of them are quite complex, some of them are not yet ready. We're not ready in space to take those yet, but some of the things we've already made progress on around our training, warranty, and induction. So we've been doing some discussions around how do we coordinate our induction program better for our staff that are coming on board. How do we look again there to make sure that they get the best induction they can. We're doing a bit of a process review. So some of the things that we're looking at, our CME, and I hate using acronyms, but our compliance monitoring and enforcement, I've got it right, model is something we're looking at the moment. Is how do we, you want to just do a brief overview around that?
So what we're doing is we're actually opening the books and just looking to make sure that we're actually doing the right thing at the right place at the right time. And that's by looking at what the tools we have available to us and making sure that we're applying them fairly and evenly regardless of what it is that we do.
So part of that will be looking at, you know, when we're out there, looking at compliance is, you know, taking to and various factors from previous history of compliance versus the complexity of the issue that we're dealing with. Those are the sort of things that are being considered as how do we balance all those sort of decisions. One of the other things we're looking at is our enforcement decision-making panel, which we've in the past or has been very RMA focused, basically compliance and consents. But what we're looking at is, you know, how do we expand that to incorporate the wider regulatory functions that we incorporate?
Jim, might just expand on that a little bit. If you're not aware of it already, we have an internal enforcement decision-making panel, which currently is made up of Paul Hulse, obviously as group manager. Myself, I chair it. Graham McKenzie, who I'm sure most of you know, very experienced senior member of the compliance team, and Donna is mostly part of that panel, but not always if she happens to be the reporting officer if it's a compliance related matter. Essentially, the high level why of that panel is to sort of sense check where we're heading on enforcement matters and make sure that we've got things calibrated correctly before we proceed further. As I'm sure you're aware, regulatory processes can go majorly wrong if they're not supported by suitable information and or the action is not appropriate. So it's sort of another sense check to our direction of travel on things. We can get legal advice, and we normally do, and that's advice, not the decision, and that's quite important. I think, you know, you can get a legal advice on a particular matter, But that legal advice is just that, it's advice, and it might, it's one factor that you bring into your overall decision making about where you land. And that's important when you're dealing with things with, affecting your community. Legal advice is advice, and you certainly don't ignore it, but it's one of the things you factor into your decision making. So the aim of this panel is basically try and sense check things, make sure that they're heading down the right path. And sometimes that, as part of that panel, we're actually putting our black hat on and say, well, if we're going to shoot down this process or this proposed course of action, how would you do it? And do that amongst friends rather than having it play out in front of a court. So broadening that panel out to be available for other parts of the organisation, like Ellie's team in the biosecurity biodiversity area, who sometimes have to do things like enforce breaches of those provisions.
And lastly, we're trying to be a lot more targeted in our planning, so we're just internally looking at how we plan over the sort of a longer term, as well as how can we coordinate those across our work that we're delivering. So these are some of the actions that we've taken. And lastly, I talked before about telling the story. For those who don't know, Malcolm Sparrow is a very well-known trainer in the regulatory world, with a number of publications around good practice and regulatory practices. But one of the key things that he said around good regulation is pick the important problems, fix them, and make sure you tell everyone.
It's very good. Central government should perhaps have a look at that.
And very much about the telling everyone is to making sure that, it's a sense check out there in the community. It's about building that credibility. It's about building that understanding that, what we're trying to achieve with the work we're doing, but also the outcomes that are happening from that. So that's where we're at, as I said. So overall, this framework is really for our team to really lift our game overall. It's something that we can focus on to drive that continuous improvement, how we can actually be more efficient and effective going forward. It's not to say we're not doing things right at the moment. It's about, where can we find those improvements and make them.
It was just further to that, and I think that's a really good quote. Councillor Rodway touched earlier, good comment too, about a lot of work that different sectors are doing about driving improvement and incentivising improvement amongst their particular sectors. And there's sort of varying degrees of that happening at the moment. Some of the dairy sector, I think, is really starting to move really positively in that direction. And we don't necessarily have to chuck a rule at everything. And, there's other ways to sort of skin the cat or get to the outcome you're looking for. So I think we need to be live to that opportunity. And just because we might have always done it that way doesn't mean we always need to do it that way. And, the carrot can sometimes be more effective than the stick. So I think long term, in terms of delivering the outcomes that we're looking for, we've got to be pretty nimble and pretty open to new ways to get to where we want to get to.
Thank you for that presentation. That gives us some comfort to know that there is a plan and that you're following through with it. Because I suppose we wonder at times how we get to where we are.
Yeah.
I think just a comment on something versus that, obviously in the community, there's probably feeling they're looking for the carrot, and the stick comes down from the government, central government, and gives them a whack. And we're selling that idea, there is a carrot out there, but we know that we're not actually the one that's providing. Like the stick seems to come and interfere a wee bit at times. Personally, I just think looking at it. Because I think there is a feeling the way we want to try and get the outcomes may not necessarily be reflected on what the central government throw at us at times.
That's part of that
challenging.
Part of that telling that story is putting things into context and where we're coming from. It's not necessarily about finger pointing, but it's around we can frame it in a better way. What we're actually delivering.
For you, Mr. Chair, I think communicating the why of it is really important as well. And maybe there's an improvement opportunity for us, or the sector generally, is to demonstrate the added value of environmental compliance. And if people can get on board with the why of that and they want to deliver that themselves, and lots of people really do, but you know, if people understand why they're being asked to do something, then they're possibly more likely to do it just than, because we're telling you have to. You know, that's that because we're telling you have to doesn't exactly cut the mustard in the modern world. So I think it's pretty important that we have a conscious sort of program to communicate why we're doing certain things.
Councillor McDonald, so you have a hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks very much, Nick, for that. It's really good presentation, and I think this is coming at a perfect time. It's always hard to self-evaluate, isn't it? And it's easier to do it when things aren't going well, but actually to be at a point that you want to evaluate to make your actions and your department even better, I think that's a really positive step forward. And I guess that I would be looking to go even further, and I may have missed part of the presentation at the start, but you know, on that panel to bring outside expertise like the chap Sparrow that you quoted, someone that has a third eye look into and can help tweak, you know, or be part of something like that. That could be of value moving forward. Just a suggestion, but well done. Very encouraging. And it's like, it is a really hard area of this council. It's where people meet head on with the regulatory machine, isn't it? And there's usually some adversarial behaviour contained within there. So it's not an easy job to be working in. So look, congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. Any further question we have, Chairman Hall?
Yes, just after Bruce's comments, I'm just wondering if we're still getting, in the past, we often seem to get consent conditions, which were often the consultant offered them up, that were seen as impractical by the farmer or whoever else, and that is quite difficult in the compliance monitoring situation to be actually be able to enforce. So we're getting less of that, or?
Yeah, through Mr. Chairman, I think so. What we're trying to do is sense check any conditions that we're putting on with Thomas' team, because the last thing we want to do is set them up for failure in the field when they can't actually monitor what we've imposed. What we also do, which is not a legislative requirement, but I think it's a good practice thing, is before we issue a final consent, we will send the applicant and their consultant the draft conditions and say, hey, this is what we're proposing to impose. And they have an opportunity to feedback before we issue it, so that they can raise any concerns they've got then, and they don't have to object or appeal to. And sometimes they will propose conditions and we'll go, no, that's actually, we're not happy with that. Is it actually adequately addressing the issue? So there's some reasonably good constructive dialogue. So hopefully then you get to the point where you're issuing a consent with conditions that can be readily enforced by Donna and her team if necessary, and also that the applicant and their consultant have had some advanced visibility around, so it's not coming like a bolt from the blue for them. They've already seen a draft.
Councillor Ludlow.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a couple of questions around my mind at rest, I guess. Firstly, the capacity and capability. Just would like some assurance that there's cultural capability and training included in some of that work, because obviously you're dealing with a good range of cultures and languages. So assuming that you are also including some of that.
So in terms of the wider things around training and that, we haven't really made a big start on that yet. So but that's certainly something that we can take into consideration around how we actually go forward with that. So we've got the training the team at the moment. What we're looking is how do we actually do a bit more of a coordinated, wider aspect. So that could be something we can certainly.
Yeah, I think important, I think. And the other thing would be, and it might be in your heads, how you see some of this work feeding into the risk and assurance conversation for the wider council, and when appreciate that council will need to set their threshold for what they need to know, but just some assurance that you're thinking about how any red flags that come up through this would feed through to that broader conversation, council.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, like sort of just firstly, just to add to the response on the first question. It's a really good question, actually. The whole organisation just did Te Tiriti training last week, maybe? Yeah, I think it was. These are training days, actually, it's been one of those weeks. But there's a broader issue here. We're dealing with a much broader range of cultures in Mariki than we were 20 years ago, which is a good thing. And different people respond in different ways. So I think that maybe there's an opportunity for us to broaden that awareness out to a broader range of cultures. So yeah, really good point. And yeah, sort of thinking about the risk insurance part of it, we do quite a bit of reporting at the moment, but it is interesting reporting because a lot of it's based on, you know, how many did you do and how long did it take? With across the regulatory part of our business, we've got a lot of risk. Like at the moment, I'd say the projects in our consenting space at the moment, if you added them all up, would be in the billions. Or, you know, so when you're talking high value projects and high stakes and quite often quite emotionally fraught type work, there's a lot of risk that goes with that. So we probably need a little bit more regular reporting up to that committee around our key risks. We report through the executive team, and I try and make sure in the consent area, and Don's doing the same in your area, that any like red flag risks are coming through to executive. But yeah, there's certainly some room for improvement in how much you see around that, because there's certainly a lot of risk in the regulatory area. And I can think of one situation outside, it's in the North Island, where an enforcement process has gone significantly wrong for that council. Not only did they get a major award of costs against them, but they've now got a separate legal action from the party that was involved. So that's, you know, that can happen when you're talking high stakes.
Thank you for that. Right, if there's no more questions and commentary. Thank you for your very informative report. Appreciate that very much. I'd like to move that we note the report, please. The recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Rodway. Chairman Horrell seconded that. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Item 5 was the integrated catchment management group work plan. It's included with your papers.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. A reasonable amount of this content has already been covered. In particular, Donna's done a really good job in her report of covering some of the permitted activities monitoring and the compliance monitoring and enforcement work that's being undertaken. Happy to do my best to answer any questions that the council might have.
Is there any questions regarding the work plan? I think we're really pretty wider reporting now than we had formerly, and it's very acceptable.
Just one that perhaps then about permitted activities monitoring. I could have asked this before when you were talking about that. I just wondered, what sort of permitted activities are you looking at? And you know, they're not, you don't have to pay for them, obviously. There's no, and the cost of monitoring those would fall back on the council as well, I suppose.
Through you, Mr. Chair, monitoring permitted activities is challenging because first of all, you have to know where they are to be able to find them and document them, and that has been the biggest scope. There's no requirement for permitted activity to be referred to your council. So as we go around, sorry, next step one, but we spoke to the science team first to say what is the highest risk activities. If we was to start a permitted activity program, where are the highest risks you think we should spend our time looking for? And so we've identified silage pads and offal hogs and farm landfills to start with for the first year, just to see what we can find as we're going around. So we're conducting those inspections and identifying them during our normal routine monitoring for the first year. That way there's no cost to anyone else. There's no additional visits to any properties. So we're not turning up extra time just to have a look. We just, if we see it, we'll document it. First stage is obviously advice and education, so we've found some that haven't been managed great. We're identifying that and doing some advice and education. Where we've had severe discharges of silage leachate, those have gone through an investigation process. So the first year is all around those two high risk areas.
Okay, thanks, Donna. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic because a permitted activity is something you're allowed to do. And I know there's probably, I think there has been the odd discussion when you're doing the inspection and then they go, oh, let's have a look over there. And they go, hang out, that's not regulate why you're nosing around a bit more than you need to. You know, from the point that it's not, if it was a concern, then why is it consented? So there's a wee bit of this concern about if it's permitted, why are we monitoring permitted things when it's like we do have things that we're allowed to do.
Absolutely, and through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely, you can.
I understand that better.
So long as they're still meeting the permitted activity criteria, and we have identified some through this where they aren't. And so we're able to work with them and provide guidance on the rules and get our catchment integration team to work with them to bring them up to permitted activity status. So this isn't for want of a terrible word, a witch hunt. We're not out there to find bad things. We're just out there to try and actually understand what's in our area and what's impacting our groundwater. This is the first year.
I think it's really important to communicate this very, very well from a point of that people, yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I know what we're trying to achieve, but when we go on to someone's private, you know, like we got a consent, we're dealing with that, and then we start talking about other things, then it may not actually within a legal requirement, you know, just making sure the comms is right, what you're doing there, what are we.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're trying to be really transparent with this. So we've always looked at those activities. So if we walk past a silage pad, we've always looked to see if it's actually okay and meeting the permitted activity status. But we're actually being more transparent and open and saying, let's go and have a look as an opportunity for some advice and education if it's needed. So we are trying to do better than what we've done before, where we've always just looked and not said anything.
Councillor Guyton.
Part of the rationale in terms of comms around that would also be changing circumstances. So with change of climate and weather patterns in South London, potential for groundwater levels to be rising. You know, you're talking about dead holes or whatever, I can't remember what the term is. You know, it's a reality that I think that the farming community should be well aware of, that things change, and it's our job not to just write it off because it was written down 10 years ago. So I think that would be quite justified in being mindful.
And through you, Mr. Chair, items like offal holes, once they're full, they get filled over and they get moved. So when people purchase properties, they don't always know where those things were. So if we are able to document that, that actually helps the potential new owner know what was on the property, where it was, and when it was closed or opened.
Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, I would like to follow on from Mr. Guyton because he seems to blame the farming industry for everything, but septic tanks was identified by the forum as one of the things affecting our water quality. They're permitted. They were permitted 60 years ago and they're still running. Does anybody ever look at them? Because that's all ending up in our waterways.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so we do have some consent for some which are monitored, but I'm happy to take it back and consider that as one of the permitted activities we look for.
I don't know, was it the forum identified it? No.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, it's a good point actually, because you know, quite often historical rural dwellings, for example, can have an effluent system that was appropriate 60 years ago, and if they've never changed anything, they've never had to upgrade it. If it's a more recent system, like if you're building a new rural dwelling, for example, then you have to meet the permitted activity criteria in our plan, where you do need a consent, and or if you have a bigger scale unit that exceeds that permitted activity in terms of scale, you need a consent as well. Through a building consent process, the STC or ICC do check compliance with the Australian New Zealand on-site wastewater standard that applies at the moment, but you do make quite a good point, because the historical on-site effluent disposal systems, they're like anything, they need to be maintained and pumped out and that sort of thing. So, it's certainly something we could consider looking at. There's sort of a dual role there with the Southern District Council as well. Some district councils have actually created some of their own regimes where they've actually rated individual property owners, and they've had a communal situation where they'll engage a contractor to go and pump out people's septic tank systems at a regular interval for a particular fee to try and make sure they're being appropriately maintained. None of the Southern councils have done that as yet, and you could argue whether that's actually a council's role or it's an individual property owner's role. But certainly, some of the old historical systems are probably well below what would be seen as acceptable today.
Chairman Hall.
Yes, well, just on the activity, that it might be permitted because it's deemed to be a low risk, but if it's found to be affecting water quality, and it could be permitted activity for water grazing, but we find that it's not compliant, we still have rules. Same with the septic tank situation. It might be a permitted activity, but if it was detected in a waterway, that there is a follow-up process. I know we've talked about in the past exactly what you said about those old systems, providing them not tapped into the tile, work reasonably efficiently, providing they are emptied out regularly. And I know really there were discussions about maybe every 5 years, the contractors would be going around. If we're doing a whole district, it would be a cheaper rate. It was just a coordination type thing. But it was also a little bit of comfort that those systems didn't wait until they will cause a major issue by overtopping and all the rest of it. Like it's simple stuff, really. It's really looked at their own water land plan, or whether it's a district thing. But if it's water, it's probably us more than the district councils. But and in some cases, those old systems, ditching machines going past, extend the field and fill it up with gravel just to make sure something that's been there 60 years, the old soakage may not be working anymore.
That's a good point you raised there, Elster. I just recall we did require the Invercargill City Council to review their ones on the Waihopai domestic inputs were detected in that stream. Council were required by us to investigate and hopefully fix. So we still have a role. All right. The work plan, is any further questions or commentary about that? If not, I'll just move from the chair, then we note the report, the work plan report, seconded by Councillor McPhail. Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, all in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Carried. The last item on the agenda was extraordinary and urgent business. We do not have any, and we don't have any restricted business. So I will declare that the meeting is concluded, and I thank you for your input and your attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I say, I think the answers provided by the staff today, Donna and Bruce and Nick, and were very good, very clear, and
Right. I think, as I mentioned before about questions too, if when you're reading the meeting notes, the agenda before you come to the meeting, you see anything you want to ask questions about, it's very helpful to the staff to know in advance so they can give complete answers to our questions. Because I don't think they like to say, well, I don't know, and I'll come back to you.
I'd just like to say, Morris I agree with Morris. Very good discussion and questions, and everybody enjoy their lunch.
We're not getting lunch.